Have you ever questioned if your teacher hates you? I wish I didn't have to, but yep, my teacher hated my guts, and she went out of her way to make it very clear. I'm Lori, by the way. I'm 15 years old, and I guess you could say I kind of stand out because of my looks. People say I'm kind of pretty. Anyway, this year I started high school, although I only joined halfway through the year because I was off sick for 6 months with glandular fever. Yep, I had the dreaded mono. I was so tired of lying in bed feeling sorry for myself, so when the doctor said I could finally go back to school, I was over the moon. Little did I know what was in store for me. On my first day, I had to show all my teachers my hospital certificate to explain why I'd missed so much of the year. When I gave it to Miss Atkin, my math teacher, she smiled and said, "Welcome. Nice to see you feeling so much better." I smiled back at her and said, "Thank you." And I was about to walk away when suddenly she said, "Excuse me, you're Lori Hannison?" Her face looked all weird, and when I told her, "Yep, that was me," something inside her changed. She gave me a cold stare and told me to go to my seat immediately. I was confused a little bit about her attitude, but then I moved on from it. The most important thing was how I could catch up with my class. After missing 6 months of math, I was super behind and couldn't understand anything. My mom had to hire a tutor for me, and he was such a good teacher. Only after 3 months, I finally caught up with them. I had a notebook from our sessions with lots of notes inside, and whenever I couldn't remember something, I'd just look at it. Well, one day, I had it on my desk at school, and Miss Atkin caught me seeing my notes. She marched towards me, grabbed it, and slammed it down in front of me. She was so angry and got right up in my face and said, "Never, ever bring another teacher's notes to my class. Do you hear me?" As she said that, a little bit of spit flew out of her mouth and landed on my nose. I was horrified. Why was she so angry at me? It kinda scared me, and I thought maybe she was just angry because I wasn't as good at math as everyone else. After that, I didn't dare bring my notebook to class, but sometimes I still struggled, so I'd ask my friend who sat nearby to help me. Miss Atkin always caught me asking her and would put me in detention. One time I just sneezed too loud and she gave me detention. I mean, can you even believe? It annoyed me so much that I started to rebel. I'd often fall asleep in her class, and I seriously lost all motivation to do well. And that's not all. One day, I wore a new dress to class, and I swear I looked exactly like all the other girls at school. But Miss Atkin publicly embarrassed me by making me stand up in front of everyone, then said, "Girls and boys, Lori is a fine example of someone who pays more attention to what she wears than to studying. Don't be like Lori." I could feel myself blushing, and I wanted to cry. She was deliberately being mean to me, and I had no idea why. I was not that kind of girl. I normally loved studying, and I didn't care about clothes and shoes at all. I couldn't say anything, though, because if I spoke back to her, she'd give me a worse grade. What made it all even worse was that she was also the cheerleading coach, and she had her pack of cheerleaders following her around everywhere. One time I was standing in the hall talking with my friend Joe. We'd been best friends since we were like 3 years old, and we also live in the same street, so we'd grown up together. Joe always had my back. So we were standing there chatting when Miss Atkin and some of her fave students walked by. Suddenly I heard one of the girls say, "Oh look, surprise, surprise, it's Lori flirting with a boy again." Then one of the other girls said, "Seriously, she's such a fake. I mean, she's using her illness to get attention from boys. How pathetic." I couldn't believe it. Did they think I was deaf or something? They were the ones who were fake with their thick layers of makeup and all of their gossip and drama. I didn't really care that they were saying these things, but what really got to me was the way Miss Atkin laughed along with them. I actually saw her nod her head, so she agreed with them. I knew that wasn't okay, and Joe saw it too. He was so angry and grabbed my hand and said we had to report her to the principal. I stopped him though and said, "Just leave it. I am still the new girl here, and I don't want to cause any drama. And anyway, I have a plan." I smirked at him as I said this. So, Miss Atkin has this policy where if someone's phone rings in class, they have to answer it on speakerphone. And that policy includes her, too. So that day, I pretended to bump into her as she entered the class and watched as her phone dropped out of her hands. I quickly picked it up and apologized for being so clumsy, but at the same time, I unmuted it when she wasn't looking. Easy peasy. You see, I'd arranged for Joe to call her. This was going to be hilarious. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, her phone started ringing loudly. Her ringtone was Beyoncé's Single Ladies, and everyone burst out laughing. She freaked out and quickly grabbed her phone to cancel it. But Joe was persistent. He just kept calling, and everyone in class reminded her of the policy, so she had no choice but to answer it. Well, just wait for this. She answered, and suddenly Joe's voice filled the room. But he'd put on a funny accent to make himself sound older. "Honey, don't forget about our secret date at our favorite hotel tonight." Miss Atkin looked like she wanted to die. She said, "Who is this? I don't know you." Then Joe said, "Come on, baby, what's up? Is your husband there?" Miss Atkin was now visibly shaking and said, "You've got the wrong number." But Joe wouldn't stop. "Aw, you're so cute. I'll see you tonight, baby. Get ready for a fun night. Wink, wink." At that, Miss Atkin hung up and the whole class was just deathly silent. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. Joe had really outdone himself. However, I hadn't exactly thought it all through, because a couple of days later, Joe and I were about to walk home when he got called into the principal's office. I went with him, but they wouldn't let me in. I could see Miss Atkin in the room along with the principal and Joe. She'd somehow found out that it was Joe who'd called her, and now the principal said that Joe would be expelled and that his parents would need to come in for a meeting the following day. Oh my God, this was all my fault. When he came out, I rushed over and started apologizing, but Joe said, "Don't worry, I did it, so I'll take the responsibility." I was beside myself with guilt. I just kept saying, "Joe, no, this is my fault. I'm the one who should be expelled." But Joe wouldn't even listen to me. Well, that evening I told my parents the whole story. I was crying as I told them, and obviously they were angry, but they were also supportive. The next day, Joe's parents came for their meeting. The principal was there, and the school board, and of course, Miss Atkin. Luckily, my parents arrived just in time to interrupt the meeting, and we burst into the room. We told them the truth, how I'd been so ill and had to get a tutor, and that's why I carried that notebook. Then how Miss Atkin had treated me so badly and been so rude to me the whole time. I told them the phone call incident had been my fault and that Joe had just wanted to help me. Suddenly, Miss Atkin stood up and pointed at me and said, "I knew it was you. You spoiled brat. You should be expelled." What happened next was crazy. My mom jumped up and said, "How dare you speak to my daughter like that? You hate her because she's my daughter. Get over it, Angela. It's been years." Well, Miss Atkin ran towards my mom and said, "You're a horrible woman, and so is your daughter. You deserve each other." She was about to grab my mom, but my dad jumped up and stopped her. I didn't understand what was happening. Everyone was so shocked. The principal looked so puzzled. Then he told us all to go home and calm down. When we got home, my mom sat me down and said, "If you're being mistreated, you need to tell us. Don't suffer it out alone, okay?" I told my mom I was fine, and that school was great, but then my dad interrupted and said, "You're fine? Don't lie to us. You were almost expelled." Then my mom said, "Honey, calm down. It's not her fault. You saw her teacher. She's a demon." Then my dad just laughed, and I was so confused. Then he said, "Oh yeah, Lori, we should have told you this already, but Miss Atkin was at school with us." Then they told me how the three of them had gone to high school together, and both my mom and Miss Atkin had a crush on my dad, so they became sworn enemies. They fought all the time, and Miss Atkin had been expelled from school because of my mom. Of course, my dad hadn't known all of that back then, and he'd fallen in love with my mom. Wow, now I understand the real reason Miss Atkin treated me like that. She was obviously still angry at my mom, and when she'd seen my name, she hadn't been able to control her anger anymore, and she'd just released it all on me. My mom said, "Lori, you look exactly like me in high school. Because I was pretty, so many people were jealous." Then she turned to my dad, smiled, and said, "I can see that Joe is quite similar to your dad. You should be careful." At that, Mom and I burst out laughing. My dad was just speechless. And guess what? It all worked out in the end. Miss Atkin got reassigned to another school, and Joe and I were only suspended from school for 2 weeks. Now we're closer than ever, and there's definitely some real chemistry between us. Finally, high school is getting good again, huh? Hi everyone. Have you ever had someone get revenge on you? It's not fun, right? Well, this is my story about revenge, but with a twist. You won't believe who my prankster turned out to be. Oh, let me introduce myself. I'm Audrey, and I'm 24. To say I've had an unhappy life would be an understatement. Firstly, my dad ditched my mom for another woman. And not long after that, my mom passed away from a serious illness. Basically, my entire life fell apart in a matter of months, and I was still too young at that time. It was tough growing up, and I always think that my life could never turn the page again. But on one fine day, someone popped into my life and changed everything. His name was Jim, and he was 7 years older than me, and he seriously turned my life around. He lived in another city, but he often came to my city on business trips. We fell for each other quickly. That happiness didn't last long, though. One day I was working in the clothes store when a girl around the same age as me came in. She wanted my help to choose some dress, but she was pretty rude to me, and I kept catching her staring at me with evil eyes. Who was she? And why was she treating me like that? Finally, after about 2 hours, she made up her mind and picked up only a tie that she wanted to buy for her husband instead. I was relieved to get rid of her, but shocked when I saw the name on her credit card. Jim Stewart. Her husband had the exact same name as my boyfriend. What a coincidence. She must have caught me staring at the card because she suddenly said, "Yes, Jim is my husband. Now stay away from him." What? Her husband? My Jim. Before I even had a chance to react, she turned to everyone in the store and said, "This girl is a gold digger, and she's trying to break up my marriage." I was shocked. I tried to explain that it wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen to me. She just stormed out, and I was left standing there hearing people whispering about me. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I immediately ran to the staff room and called Jim. I was really hoping it had all been a big misunderstanding, but I could tell from Jim's tone that it was the truth. He told me he'd lied to me, and that he actually lived in the same city. He just made up the business trip stuff so he wouldn't have to see me often. Then he said, "Audrey, I honestly love you. I'm serious about us." Hang on, was he for real? It was ridiculous. I was disgusted by him. How could he treat me like that? I hung up and felt horrified. It brought back horrible memories of the woman who stole my dad away from my mom. I didn't want to be that woman. The next day, I moved out of the house Jim had rented for me. I didn't want to be associated with that loser anymore. But life works in mysterious ways. The day I moved into my new house, I saw Jim's wife. And you won't believe it. It seemed that she'd just moved in next door too. Was this some kind of joke? As soon as she saw me, she smirked and said, "Wow, what a coincidence. Hello, neighbor. I'm Linda." Seeing her unpacking her stuff all by herself, I couldn't help but wonder where Jim was. But then I thought maybe Linda had ended things with him and had moved here alone. I hope so anyways. I'd hate to have Jim as a neighbor. So that's when my new life began. And it has been crazy ever since. From that first week of living there, Linda started pranking me. It all began with her throwing trash into my yard. I even caught her doing it, and she just grinned and said, "Oops, my hand slipped." Then she walked away laughing. It made me furious. And that was just the beginning. One weekend, a delivery guy rocked up on my porch with 10 extra large pizzas. I tried to explain I hadn't ordered them, and that's when Linda appeared at my door and said, "Oh, thanks for ordering me dinner, Audrey. I'm starving." Then she grabbed 5 of the pizzas and ran to her house, leaving me there with a bill of $100. Jeez, it was so annoying, and I had no option but to pay. Linda was too much. Seriously. As much as her pranks drove me up the wall, I also felt sorry for her. I knew what it was like to have someone you love stolen away from you. She must have hated me so much for ruining her marriage, even though it hadn't been my fault. I decided to just put up with her pranks. She'd get over it eventually, and it's not like they were harming me, right? Well, one night I heard the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone and was surprised to see a young guy standing there with a poster that said, "I agree to be your boyfriend. Come out with me." I was totally puzzled and told him he had the wrong house, but then he showed me the address on the other side. It was my address. What on earth? I told him I wasn't interested, but he tried to grab my hand and said, "Come on, girl, don't be shy." I told him if he didn't leave me alone, I'd call the police. So luckily he ran away. Needless to ask, I knew for sure that was Linda's joke. But this time she had taken it too far. I decided to go over and have a word with her once and for all. As I was walking to her house, I saw someone familiar on the other side of the road. I couldn't believe it. It was my dad? So many years had passed, and he'd completely changed. But there was no doubt it was him. I suddenly blurted out, "Dad?" But I didn't know what to do next. I was just thinking about my next move when I felt someone behind me. I turned around and saw Linda. She just smirked at me and walked away. What was her problem? Did she hear what I just said? I was so shocked at seeing my dad, I ran back into my house. I hated him for what he'd done to my mom. But he was still my dad, and I wanted to know if he was okay and what he was doing here. I barely slept that night as I couldn't stop thinking about my dad. The next morning, I was sitting by the window when he appeared again. This time, he was with Linda, and she was holding his arm. What was she doing with my dad? Why were they so close? Later that day, I saw him again, and this time, he and Linda were hugging. OMG, were they dating? Maybe Linda had heard me call him dad, and now she was flirting with him to truly get revenge on me. This was too much. The thought of Linda as a stepmom made me want to puke. I waited and waited, but he was inside her house and there was no sign of him leaving. Eventually he left, and as soon as he was in his car, I ran over to her house. I was shaking as I knocked on the door, and as Linda opened it, I said, "You are way too much. Can you just stop with the revenge already?" Linda looked confused and said, "What the heck are you talking about?" Linda still didn't seem to get it, and I was about to explain when I heard footsteps. I turned around and my dad was right there. He said, "What's the matter, Linda? Why are you fighting with this stranger?" Huh? Stranger? Didn't he recognize me? Then Linda butted in and said, "It's okay, Dad. We're just having a misunderstanding here." What? Dad? Is he your dad? Really? I stammered. "Yeah, why? What's the matter?" She said, "Linda, you don't need to lie to me. I know you're dating my dad to get revenge on me," I continued. "Whoa, hold on. What do you mean your dad?" Linda gasped. At that, my dad looked confused too, and walked to me and asked if he could look at my hand. After seeing my birthmark, he started crying and hugging me. "Audrey, it's you. It's really you." I didn't know how to react, so I just let him hug me. It had been so long since anyone had held me like this. Ever since my mom had died, I'd tried to be strong and keep it together, but suddenly I couldn't hold back anymore. I burst into tears in his arms. We stood like that for a long time, and eventually he took me into Linda's house and told me the story. It turned out, after he left me and my mom, he got tricked by that woman, and he was so ashamed, he decided to move to another city and start over. He was working hard on a construction site one day when he got injured, so he ended up in hospital. And that's when he met Linda. She'd been in a car accident and needed a blood transfusion urgently. She has a pretty rare blood type, but luckily my dad had the same type and he volunteered to give her a transfusion. After that, they became quite close, and seeing as Linda had lost both her parents in the car accident, my dad eventually adopted her. I couldn't believe it. My dad had been through so much, and this whole time, I thought he was off living his life with a rich woman. I felt so bad for him and decided to leave the past behind and forgive him. As for Linda, she was also left confused by this coincidence, so she left the room to process everything, while I and Dad took time to catch up on our lives. Later, Linda prepared dinner for us three, and before we digged in, she shyly grabbed my hand and said, "Audrey, I've been so awful to you. I'm sorry. I know you aren't the one responsible for my divorce, but I still felt upset, and that's why I played all those pranks. That was so childish, right? Please forgive me, sister." We laughed it off, then hugged each other to make peace. I couldn't believe it. After all these years of being lonely, suddenly I had a sister, and my dad was back. My life had finally turned a corner, and I almost laughed at the thought that it was all because of meeting Jim. At least one good thing had come out of that disastrous relationship.
"Hey, Alex." I felt someone tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see who it was, and it was Roxy, my crush, who also happened to be the most beautiful girl in the world. I figured I must have been in her way, so I quickly mumbled out, "Sorry," and stepped aside. But out of my surprise, she smiled at me and said, "So, a little birdie told me you like me? You know, I think it's cute you haven't made a move on me yet. Not like most of the guys around here." I stared at her open-mouthed. Was I dreaming? I pinched myself to check. Nope, this was real. So I nodded my head and muttered out, yeah? "My friend's having a party at their frat house on Wednesday. You want to come?" Before I could reply, her friend Luke appeared, and grinning, he said, "Yeah, you just gotta come to this party." Roxy hit his arm while giving him a dirty look, then smiled at me. "So it's at number 19, starts at 9 p.m. I'll see you then?" I nodded in response, and she said, "Great, see you there." Then she winked at me before she walked off. So yeah, I'm Alex, your average second-year college student. And this is the story about how my crush tried to lure me into a seriously sinister trap. I guess I'm a normal guy. I'm not as rich and popular as the kids from the frat houses are. Instead, my room is in the regular dorms, and although I'm not ugly or unpopular or anything, I'm easily overlooked. So I kept my crush on Roxy a secret because she was way out of my league. She was so beautiful, this was crazy. How did she even find out that I liked her? I couldn't believe that she'd asked me out. This was mad. At first, I felt like the luckiest guy ever. But then as I watched Roxy walk back to her friends, I noticed them giggling, except for this one girl called Sophie. Meanwhile, Luke was making everyone high-five him. He was always a little odd, and he spoke to people in strange ways. Then I caught Sophie's eye, and she gave me a look that said, "Don't." Then she promptly looked away. Her jerky boyfriend Jack had his arm around her shoulder and was tugging on one of her trademark pigtails as he glugged back his drink. I had no idea what she saw in him. But what had her look been about? Back in my dorm, I discussed it with my roommate Ben, and he said it sounded like a setup. As much as I wanted it to be legit, my gut instinct was also saying that it was too good to be true. So the night of the party, I decided to take a look out my dorm window, as it's in the perfect location to get a clear view of the frat houses. I counted the houses down to number 19. Then I took out my binoculars, for which I used for field research studies, to take a closer look. The house had a large rainbow pride flag hanging from the two windows. This made me wonder why Roxy would want to go to a gay party. I saw a lot of feminine dressed men, and the only two girls that I could spot were far from attractive. And it seemed like they were a couple. And then there was Luke in the front yard holding 2 drinks and looking around like he was waiting for someone. Where was Roxy? I decided to check her social media to see if she'd posted anything. And I noticed she'd left her location open. She was in a nightclub, Diego's. That was strange. So I gave the party a miss, and instead Ben and I went to a student bar. I told him about it, and he said it sounded like I dodged a bullet. The next day I was sitting with Ben and some of my other friends in the canteen when Roxy stormed over to me and yelled out, "How dare you stand me up? Who do you think you are?" Luke appeared and said, "Yeah, why not show?" I just shrugged and said, "Roxy, I know you weren't there. Your phone location's public. You were at Diego's." She hesitated, then said, Yeah, my friend borrowed my phone. But what you did was so creepy, you stalker." As if. Roxy was never without her phone, so I wasn't buying her story. This whole thing didn't make any sense, so I sort of mouthed out, "Whatever, Roxy," then carried on eating my lunch. After that, she started making my life a living hell. She told everyone that I was stalking her, so random students started coming up to me and telling me to leave her alone. Then someone covered the dorm corridors in leaflets with a picture of my face and the word "stalker" written across them. I knew Roxy was behind it. It was so weird. But Luke was worse. One time after class, he sneaked up on me, grabbed my arm, and said, "Hey Alex, why you bail on my party?" I told him that I saw the party from a distance and it wasn't my thing, so he replied, "Hey, you got a probs with me being gay?" I shook my head and told him I didn't, but he still wouldn't let go of my arm. I was relieved when he finally let go of me, and I hurried back to my dorm. On the way, I spotted Sophie sitting outside on the shared bathroom. Hang on, why was she in the flood of tears? I asked her if she was okay, but she told me to go away. Although I didn't want to put my nose where it shouldn't be. But I wasn't heartless, so I left her my bottle of water before I walked off. I said, "If you want to talk about it, I'm here for you." I was unlocking my dorm room when I heard someone cough behind me. I turned around to see Sophie standing there. She thanked me for the water and she said she wanted to talk. I led her into my room and she sat on my bed. And staring at her feet, she said in tears, "I caught Jack and Roxy by the locker rooms. But when I confronted them about it, they just shooed me away. I sat down next to Sophie and hugged her. This was horrible. It looks like I've been so wrong about Roxy. She wasn't my dream girl at all. Instead, she was a nightmare. Sophie continued. It gets worse. Roxy stole my assignment and submitted it as her own. It's due tomorrow and I don't have the time to write a new one. She started crying again. I passed her a tissue and said, We'll sort this out. There's no way she's getting away with it. That's horrible. So I told her to send an email to the college dean and to her course tutor explaining what happened. She'd attached the original assignment and all the notes she'd written about it. They both got back to us within minutes and said that they would look into this. Sophie looked so delighted, but then suddenly her smile dropped, and she fiddled with one of her pigtails as she said, Alex, there's something I need to tell you. Please don't hate me. Then she told me how the party Roxy had invited me to had been a trap. Roxy found out I had a crush on her, and she was embarrassed that an average guy like me dared to have feelings toward her. And she was adamant she needed to teach me a lesson. So that's when Luke said he would help, as he wanted to add me to his collection, so they hatched a plan. Roxy invited me to the party, and Luke was waiting for me with a spiked drink. Apparently, this was Roxy's way of silencing me, and making sure I didn't look at her in the same way ever again. Whoa, this was so dark. I shivered at the thought of what could have been. It was terrifying. Sophie also told me that she begged Roxy not to do this, but she got her friends to hold her down. Then she told her that if she intervened, they'd make her suffer. I comforted Sophie and told her that it wasn't her fault. I knew I couldn't just stay quiet on this, as they could do this to some poor other guy who dared to have a crush on her. So with Sophie's help, we wrote a letter to the dean and to the college security about what had happened. This wasn't going to be taken lying down. Sophie was terrified that Roxy and her friends would come after her, so I invited her back to my hometown for the weekend to get away from everyone and let things cool down. When we arrived back at college, news spread that Roxy had been expelled for stealing another student's work. As for Luke, the cops raided his frat house and found loads of banned substances hidden in there. It was so serious that it went to court, and they ended up in jail. As for Jack, he tried to guilt-trip Sophie as to why she should get Roxy expelled for dumb reasons, but she stopped talking to him anyway. I often think back to the night of the party and what could have been. My life would have been ruined, and what for? All because I dared to have a crush on a beautiful girl. I say good riddance. Some good has come out of this whole mess. Sophie and I grew closer and started dating. Now we've both graduated, and that's not all. We have 2 amazing kids together. I love my beautiful family with all my heart, and I just want to protect them from all the bad in this world. So in short, I don't think that just because you're beautiful, rich, and popular, that you get to get away with doing whatever you please. Regardless of age, sex, looks, and so on, everyone deserves to be treated with respect and compassion.
Hey, that guy over there just asked for your info, the bartender said, which made me turn and look around. Oh, he's gone. As you can see, I'm sitting at the bar of a 5-star resort. No, I'm not rich. Instead, I took out all my savings and decided to splurge them on enjoying every single last day left of my life. It all started months ago. I had this constant aching and exhaustion. I blamed work stress, but my symptoms grew worse. Eventually, I went to the doctor and sat there in stunned shock as I heard the words cancer and progressive. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of hospital appointments and treatments. I had chemo, and my lovely long hair fell out. I just felt tired and hopeless all of the time. Enough that I had this. I stopped the chemotherapy, quit my job, and decided to enjoy the little time I had left. The Hawaiian beach is so beautiful. Then suddenly, someone walked straight into me. Ugh, their drink soaked me. I heard them say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." "Oh, hey, you're the girl who sat alone at the bar earlier." I looked up, and wow, he was handsome. I shook my head and insisted it was my fault for not paying attention. After that, he joined me for a walk, and we started chatting. Oh, his name's Blake, by the way. So the next day, I asked him out for lunch. I don't have much of an appetite these days, and the most I could do was staring down at my barely touched plate. Then I knew I needed to be honest with him. "Hey, Blake, I really like you, and want to get to know you more, I have cancer and don't have long left. At first, there was a sickening silence, but then he took my hand, and can you believe it? He said he wanted to get to know me too. The next few weeks with him were magical. Then we came back to the city and continued dating. Blake was so amazing and constantly showered me with love. One night after dinner, Blake drove us up to this hill. He said he wanted to show me Orion's belt, and it was so romantic. I didn't want to ruin the moment, but there was something I needed to tell him. Blake, I saw the doctor today. He said that nothing has changed. Although he didn't mention it, I guess I don't really have much time left. My tears streamed down my face. I've had the best time with you. I really do think I love you. Suddenly, Blake got down on one knee and asked me, My darling Lucy, will you marry me? This is the least I can do for you. I was speechless, so I nodded and then held him tightly in my arms. I was too happy. I couldn't help sharing our love story on social media. Soon, thousands of people were liking and sharing it, saying what an inspirational couple we were. This was crazy, but amazing. Their support made me feel like I could take on my cancer, the world, everything. I started noticing that Blake was getting a lot of attention from other girls. They knew he was the guy who proposed to the dying girl, so they seemed to flock around him and admire him. Then one day, when we were at the wedding dress store together, I stepped out of the fitting room in this beautiful gown, feeling like a princess. But then I spotted Blake talking to some other girl. She touched his shoulder, and I overheard her say, Your fiancé is very lucky to have you. Then she leaned in closer to him. Blake? I hissed at him. Baby, how do I look? He turned away from the girl and stared at me. Yeah, gorgeous. He awkwardly smiled. I couldn't help but feel terrible. I know he's an attractive man, but he was about to marry me. It was not nice at all having him flirt with someone else at my dress fitting. Still, I tried to put it all aside, as I wanted to enjoy what little time I had left. The wedding was a dream come true. It was such a magical day. Then right before our honeymoon, I went to see my doctor. To my complete and utter shock, he told me, I'm pleased to inform you that you're in recovery. Oh my God. I couldn't believe my ears. I was getting better. I rushed home and told Blake the good news. Only his reaction wasn't what I expected. His face dropped, and at first he was speechless. Then he stuttered, Congrats, honey. What did that even mean? Regardless of this, our honeymoon was marvelous. My appetite was back, and I was making the most of it. Yum! Food tastes so good. This didn't go unnoticed by Blake, and he tutted, Can you try chewing more gently? Whatever. I was intent on enjoying my food. When we arrived back home, I moved into his apartment. For God's sake, there were dirty plates and smelly socks everywhere. How could someone so meticulous about their looks live in such a state? I told myself that it was fine. I loved him, so I could learn to love his mess. Being alive felt so good. So admittedly, I may have overdone it on the snacks. Cake, meals out, and yeah, I'd gained some extra pounds, so household chores were a bit too much for me. Besides, why should I have to do them? It was his mess. But one time, when I was sick of his stinky underpants everywhere, I asked him, How can a guy who looks like you live in this rat hole? Go clean up. But he ignored me and went straight to bed. And it took no time for his loud thunder snores to follow. What the hell? Where was the kind, charming man I married? Fed up, I tried my best to clean up the place a little bit. I was out of breath and sweating a lot. My head was super itchy, so I took off my wig and scratched my scalp. At that moment, I heard Blake screaming, and when I turned around, he was clutching his face in fear. Baby, what's wrong? I rushed to him. Oh, I got it. I laughed out. It was just too uncomfortable to wear this wig, so I took it off. That's all, but look, my hair is growing back again. Shaking, he stuttered. You were wearing a wig this whole time? You look terrifying. Well, yeah, I suppose jagged growing hair made me look quite creepy. Shouldn't you be happy for me? I mumbled and forced a smile, while trying to put the wig back on. Knowing that I was able to live life again was incredible. But living Blake with my moody, uncaring husband now, that wasn't so great. One evening, he came home from work in a foul mood and started shouting at me for not tidying up. I told him I shouldn't have to, as it wasn't my mess. He scowled at me. I single-handedly provide for the both of us. Come home to see you chilling on your huge backside, and you dare talk to me like that? You're the one who needs to get up and work, since you eat double the amount I do. His words hurt, so with teared-up eyes, I said to him, How dare you talk to me like that? Blake was about to say something, but he paused, then just sighed. Look, I'm sorry, babe. I know you're recovering. I sharply stared at him and said, I didn't do anything for dinner, so let's eat out. I was enjoying my rotary chicken. It was so good that I might have taken too big of a bite and it lodged in my throat. Soon I was choking, I couldn't breathe. Afraid, I looked at Blake for help, but he was scrolling through his phone. Then to my disbelief, he walked off to the bathroom. I kept thudding the table to call for help. Luckily, a waiter rushed over and hit me real hard on the back, and I managed to spit the piece of chicken out. When Blake returned, I angrily asked, How the hell could you leave me like that? What are you talking about, baby? I saw you enjoying your food. Are you done? Let's go home. Ugh! He definitely knew I was choking. What a jerk. Everything I once thought and expected from him shattered. He was willing to let me choke to death over helping me. The problem was our love story was so famous now, and even though I knew Blake and I couldn't bear each other, the thought of us breaking up and being heckled by others made me feel so sick. I guess I was stuck with him forever. So we had to continue tolerating each other. Then one evening, while I was munching on potato chips and watching TV, my phone rang. It was a strange number. Hello? Are you Blake's wife? Blake's been in a car accident, and we really need you to come here. I froze for a few seconds. Sorry, wrong number, and hung up. My phone rang several more times, but I didn't answer. The guilt started to creep up on me, so I grabbed my bag and rushed to the hospital. The nurse told me to sign some papers so Blake could have his surgery. With a pen in hand, I hesitated. Excuse me, where is the organ donating section? I asked. My husband is willing to donate if anything bad happens. This is not the right time to ask me that question, the nurse yelled at me. Right at that moment, Blake's parents rushed in panicking. I gave them the papers and sneaked back to the apartment. After that, I thought long and hard about our relationship. It had been so passionate at first, but I realized I didn't love him at all, and neither did he. All our decisions were made intensely quickly, based on the idea that I might die later. We were too stubborn to admit defeat and walk away, and now we were miserable. A few weeks later, Blake came home in a wheelchair, and we both sat in awkward silence. Then I broke the ice. That night, when I choked at the restaurant, did you ignore me on purpose? Blake answered me with another question. Is it true you wanted to donate my organs instead of helping me get my surgery? I replied, I'm sorry. That was the only way I could briefly think of to get out of this marriage. He sighed. I know. Me too. I think we're just too similar, and that's why we don't work. He paused. I think it's time we put an end to this. So finally, we stopped putting up with each other and filed for divorce. People on social media were furious and posted a lot of venomous comments, such as, so much for being an inspirational couple, and this screams out scam marriage to me. I decided to close all of my online accounts. Their opinions don't matter anymore. I have my family's support. That's more important. Surprisingly, I'm still friends with Blake. Hey, we went through a lot together, and he's not all bad. I just never want to live with him ever again. I even met my current boyfriend through Blake, as he introduced me to him. How funny is that? Sometimes things don't work out as planned, but that's okay. Living a lie just to save a bruised ego is much worse. Oh, by the way, this is my real hair. I am now completely healthy. Remember, you only live once. So, make sure you don't waste your time trying to please others, and instead, you embrace life and live it at its best. Hey, Dan, how about we go to that Japanese restaurant I want to try? But my mom's expecting me home for dinner, Dan awkwardly replied. Again? I rose an eyebrow. Predictably, his next move was taking out his phone and calling Mommy Dearest. Mom says eating out is very expensive. It's your idea, so you're paying, okay? Excuse me? Did I mishear him? Unbelievable. So, through gritted teeth, I said, Forget it. I'm going home. Then I left him standing there with a stupid look on his face. Yep, that idiot was my boyfriend, Dan. He's in his 20s, but every conversation is still, my mom this and my mom that. It's so exhausting. At first, I thought I'd found a manly, impeccable man to rely on. Instead, it just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover, y'all. It all started with me coming back to the country, and it was hard finding my feet here again. Also, I hadn't had a boyfriend for, let's say, a long time. I wasn't that desperate, but my auntie insisted on matchmaking me with this cute guy. I thought, why not? First impressions, Dan was fine. He'd just graduated from a prestigious college, and he seemed so gentle and kind. We spent a good time chit-chatting, so yeah, after that we started dating. It was swell at first, but then the abnormal details about him began to surface. We arranged a date at mine once. The plan was to cook a meal together, then relax watching a movie. But as soon as he arrived, he walked straight over to the couch and started watching TV without any helpful intention. I dragged him into the kitchen, passed him a carrot and the peeler. He looked confused, then stuttered, but I don't know how. I tried to show him, but despite explaining it in great detail, Dan still fumbled to peel one lousy carrot. Then, yep, you guessed it, at one point he called his mom. Then he told me, My mom says the kitchen is a very dangerous place. I could cut or burn myself. We could go back to my place. My mom can do the cooking. I glared at his arms akimbo. Or we can eat out, Dan mumbled. Only if it's on you, Claire. It's not my fault. I growled while shaking my head. Fine, then I'm not coming with you. Then I pushed him out and slammed the door shut behind him. What the hell just happened? Still, I told myself that maybe he was just scared, since he has never cooked before. One time we were in a clothes shop, and I spotted this shirt that I knew would suit him. It wasn't his usual style, but I insisted he tried it on, and ooh, he looked so good in it. Dan seemed to like it too, as he admired himself in the mirror, then said, It does look nice, but wait, can you please take a photo so I can send it to my mom? Well, she's the one who buys all my clothes, so... What? So now he needed approval from his mom before he bought anything? Jeez. Anyway, I took a couple of photos and he sent them to his mom. They exchanged messages, then he turned to me and said, Okay, Mom says you can buy me it. Me? My eyes widened. Yeah, Mom says you chose it, so you should buy it for me. Wait, what? I literally froze for seconds. Speechless, I could only glare at him before I found the means to leave. Claire, what's wrong? Dan chased after me, but I ignored him. Okay, I admit that, after a few dates, it was easy to figure out he was a total mommy's boy. But I told myself that it was sweet he loved his mom so much, and I never expected it to be that extreme. After that, I used the silent treatment on him, but he wouldn't quit bugging me. Then, he told me he wanted to take me out to my favorite restaurant as a birthday treat. Ooh, this sounded great! Perhaps he'd realized something and wanted to make it up for me. We were holding hands and walking toward the restaurant when we passed by a shoe store, and in the window display were the perfect pair of boots. Well, I'm a girl, and it was my birthday. I pulled Dan's arm. "Danny, look!" I pointed at the boots. "I want those." I grinned from ear to ear. "Okay," Dan replied blandly. My smile faded. I mean, they'd make the best birthday present. Ugh, since when did a girl like me have to ask for a gift? "Why?" Dan shrugged. "You like them, I don't." My face reddened with anger. "But it's my birthday." Dan scratched his head and forced a smile. "Sorry, babe. Last night I spent my allowance on some new games, so I'm broke now." "Pfft," I sneered. "Why don't you ask your mom?" And he unexpectedly went mad. "Hey, you're obviously the wealthier one. How come you keep asking me to buy you stuff?" "Enough!" I stopped dead. "I have never, ever dated anyone as awful as you before. You're a grown-ass man, so stop running to your mommy every time you forget how to turn the kettle on or stub your toe. And why on earth do you still get an allowance at your age? It's over." Then I turned to leave, without letting him have the last word. So freaking unreal. Trust me, to arrive back in the country and end up straight into this bizarre mommy's boy circumstance. But yeah, at least I was finally free of him now. It's been a few weeks since then, but just the thought of Dan still made me so mad. Ugh, I needed to get out of here and live a little. So I called my close friend Philip and arranged to meet him and some of my trusted guy friends at a bar. "Cheer up, little girl," he teased. "I know what will put a smile on your face. Our gaming group found this hilarious player. All we have to do is throw a few compliments his way, and he buys us all new items. Then, whenever we go out partying after a victory, this noob also pays for it all. What an ego." I mocked, "Congrats, bros. Wish my ex-date was also that generous." Then I rolled my eyes. He never spent a cent. Well, at least not without asking his mom for permission first. Philip laughed with a surprise. "Hey, this noob's the same. He brags that despite being broke, his mom came up with the idea of matching him with rich girls so he can be covered." Hold up, that didn't sound right. I had a real bad feeling about this. Then Philip pointed across the bar and said, "Oh, speak of the devil," and patted my back. A chill ran down my spine as I took a deep inhale of breath and turned to see it was Dan. And oh, he had a new girlfriend already. I quickly made up some excuse and bailed before they saw me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Dan's new girlfriend. Whatever Dan and his mom were doing was no less than scamming. So, I arranged to meet up with Philip at a diner, and I confided in him about my history with Dan and how I was concerned about his new girlfriend. Philip offered to help and said he would try and find out more information. A few days later, he reported back with his findings. Turns out, Dan and his mom had learned the Claire lesson, so this time with his new girlfriend, Lizzie, they were playing it differently. Dan, as his mom had ordered, took some sensitive photos of Lizzie, and now every time she refused to pay for something, he threatened to post them online. OMG! This made me feel so sick. This poor girl was trapped and were sucked dry of all her money. This was extortion, and I was going to put a stop to it. It didn't take long for me to find Lizzie online. I then dropped her a message saying I wanted to help, and we arranged to meet up in person. After hearing me say that I knew the truth, Lizzie burst into tears. "I can't let those pictures get out, so I have to keep on being his girlfriend and pay for everything." She rubbed the tears off her cheeks. "I had to borrow money, and now the interest means I'm in thousands of dollars worth of debt, and I still have no guts to speak out." "Let's put an end to this." I slammed my fist on the table. "Be brave, Lizzie. I've got your back." The day after Philip and I went with Lizzie to tell her parents, it was bad. Her mom started blubbering and tried to cover her face while her dad went furious. "No one does this to my little girl and gets away with it." Philip replied, "Too right, the bad guys are going down." We spent the rest of the day gathering evidence, including all of the threatening messages Dan had sent her and the receipts she'd kept from the extortionate purchases he'd forced her to make for him. That was when Lizzie received a message from Dan. "There's this expensive restaurant I want to go to. Babe, take me there tonight or else. Love you, X." Lizzie replied that she agreed. Then, knowing Dan was out, we went around to his house. We confronted Dan's mom as soon as she let us inside. She was frightened and eventually confessed that she didn't have a job and it was Dan's dad who provided for them. As a result, she spoiled Dan so badly that it annoyed his dad, so he left. Then she sadly blurted out, "He didn't say a word to me. He just left Dan a note that said, 'Take care of yourself and your mom.' I knew Dan would be miserable without his luxuries, so I told him to find a rich girlfriend to spoil him, and this time," she looked from me to Lizzie, "to make sure she would be too trapped to ever leave." There was a knock at the door. She looked at us awkwardly before she went to answer it. We followed her, and that was when we saw 2 cops arresting her. She bursted into tears as they took her away. I guess she thought she was a devoted mother who was doing right by her son, when, in truth, she went about it in totally the wrong way. She ended up going to jail, and her house was sold to pay off Lizzie's debts. As for Mommy's boy Dan, as an accomplice, he ended up doing community restitution. Hey, this would probably do him some good, as he'd finally learn what a day's hard work actually felt like. Thankfully, Lizzie gradually got over this traumatizing event and was ready to start dating again. With Philip. About me, well, I'm still single, but I don't feel lonely anymore, as I have awesome friends. Besides, this way I have no guys bumming money off me.
Finally, I'm out of that morbid place. Now let me tell you, sharing a cell with a dozen other noisy, stinky, grumpy dudes ain't fun. Anyway, here I am, free as a bird now. So no one's here to pick me up. Suppose I'd have to call Mom. It took me a few seconds to familiarize myself with my phone. Jeez, it'd been 4 years. It was a miracle I hadn't turned into one of those leg-cradling crazy dudes. How I ended up in there in the first place was a joke. All I did was take some stuff from 1 or 2 warehouses and sell them on. No big deal. "Yo, Mom, it's your boy Cole. I'm out, and yeah, I need a lift home." I spoke the moment I heard Mom's voice. "Cole, Do you have any idea what hell your actions have put your mother through?" My dad was so good at overreacting, but I needed somewhere to stay, so I could handle him. "But Dad, Mom, come on, I'm still your son. You have the heart to see me homeless and sleeping next to rats?" There was a brief pause. Then Dad grunted, "You can stay for a few weeks, but only for your mother's sake." "Thanks, Dad. You're the man." Bingo. My parents were like putty in my hands. This was the life. I played video games all day, then partied all night. Then one night, I was getting ready to meet my friend Moose, when Mom told me that the pizza delivery guy was at the door. I shouted down to her, "You can shout me this one, and I'll get the next." I finished getting ready, and I must say, I was looking smooth. I strode down into the kitchen and grabbed a slice of pizza. Dad was sitting there glaring at me over his report. "If you can't afford to pay for items, then I suggest you don't order them." He looked at the pizza slice in my hand. Mom walked up behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. "Darling, give him some more time. He's still adjusting to outside life." "Thanks, Mom. You're the greatest." I gave her a greasy pizza kiss on the cheek. Any chance you can lend me some dough?" Dad shook his head and sighed, while Mom went over to her purse and passed me some money. Hey, there'd be plenty of time to get a job and be responsible. Right now, I had 4 years of lost time to make up for. Once, I borrowed Dad's car. I swear I only had a couple of beers, but the world glitched out and went all blurry. The next thing I know, I'd driven straight into the neighbor's front yard. Oops. I opened my eyes the next morning to a killer headache. So all I wanted was some black coffee and a plate full of bacon. But I got Dad's death stare instead. Just when I think you can't get any more irresponsible, you took my car without asking, drank too much, then drove into Gloria's beloved rose bushes. Chill out, Dad. I'll fix it later, I said as I raided the fridge for food. You're not the one having to pay for the damages. We've made our decision. You have 1 week to get out of our house. Now hold up. I had 0 places to go. I couldn't stay with Moose, as he was crashing in his sister's garage, and I didn't know anyone else. How could they? I gotta chill a bit, so I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through dating apps. Then I matched with this stunning blonde called Trudy. She's a little older than me, but her family is rolling in dough, and also, she has her own business. Not only that, but she's hotter than an agitated dragon. So yeah, her photos seemed a little grainy, but guess the retro trend was in. Looks like I had it both ways, love and money. I have quite a face, but since I love beer and pizza, and without any dedication for the gym, I don't have the perfect body. But I needed to keep this girl interested. So I told her I was a tall dude with an impressive six-pack, who just graduated and was on the lookout for a girl with brains as well as beauty. This girl was actually pretty easy to talk to. She sent me pictures of her latest purchases, like phones, expensive watches, and designer clothes, along with the promise that when we started dating in person, she'd buy me whatever I wanted. Result: after 4 days of face pics and my priceless conversation, Trudy was smitten, and she sent me a message saying, "Cole, I haven't known you long, but I know how I feel. I love you. X." Okay, that's really fast, but yeah, I've won the lottery over here. Hey, maybe she lied about her look too, but it didn't matter. She's rich. So I replied to her, "I know, babes. I feel it too. X." We immediately arranged to meet in person and decided on a yellow dress code. I looked around the park trying to spot this gold mine, but all I could see was some old lady in a yellow dress. Okay, coincident, but why is she heading my way? The closer she got toward me, the wider her grin was. Cole, right? It's me, Trudy. What? No. How come this corny, overweight, wrinkly old lady be Trudy? I was expecting the blonde beauty from the photos, not Big Bird. Once I got over the initial shock, we sat down and talked. Turns out my dream girl was in her 50s. All the descriptions and photos of her were true, but 30 years ago. She was clearly in the middle of a midlife crisis or something. "You're not the same either," she sneered. "You're barely taller than me. And where's the gym body?" All right, fair enough. I fake smiled. "Yeah, despite you looking different, I still find you very beautiful." That night, I tossed and turned. This was all so unexpected. Trudy was totally not my type. But dating her might not hurt. She was rich. And also, I had to move out tomorrow. So at least she'd pay for me. With that, I sent her a message. "Babe, you're beautiful, and I want to make us official. X." The next day, I moved in with Trudy. Now, let me tell you something. Her apartment was lavish. It was full of the latest tech. Crazy. Seeing as she was so old, she probably didn't know how to use them. She worked a lot, so most of the time I was home alone. And I was free to watch cartoons and movies, munch on potato chips, and play as many video games as I felt like. One time, I was watching a movie when the door opened. And in stepped this glary-eyed dude. I shouted at him, "Hey dude, you have the wrong apartment." He tutted and said, "I can assure you that I don't. I'm Alex, Trudy's son, and you must be Cole. I would say it's a pleasure to meet my mother's gold-digging boyfriend in the flesh, but unfortunately, it's not." What? Trudy has a son? And by the looks, he's even older than me. And how dare he called me a gold digger? I suppose I was, but still, he had no right to call me it. Even worse, he refused to leave. He just sat in the kitchen and waited for his mom to return. Then he had a heated argument with her in which he referred to me as a loser and a bum. Things weren't any better with my parents either. Dad told me to be independent and get a real job, not a sugar mama. And Mom was just crying. Whatever. This was their fault for kicking me out in the first place. What did they expect me to do? Live under a bridge? Few days after I met Alex, Trudy insisted on dragging me along to his lame work launch thing. As soon as I got there, I went straight to the food. I was stuffing a mini quiche into my mouth when this girl walked up alongside me and said, "Great minds think alike." I gave her a gormless look. Then she pointed at the food. We both headed straight for the food. I laughed at that. This girl was funny. And hot. Really hot. Her name is Beatrice, and she works for that loser Alex. After that, I started seeing a lot more of this Beatrice girl, as she often popped over with Alex, and while he was arguing with his mom, usually about me, I chatted to her. That was how I found out she wasn't having it easy either. She was behind on her rent because her truant brother had stolen the money and spent it all. I felt bad for her, so I took the envelope full of cash that Trudy had given to me, and I handed it to her. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to buy anything new for a few weeks, but it was worth it just to know that she'd be okay. Truth was, I was really falling for Beatrice, but I couldn't do anything about it, as I was with Trudy, and I was relying on her handouts. Soon, things became stinky. I came out of the shower to see Trudy standing there with my phone in her hand. "How could you?" She threw it at me. Yeah, so she'd read all of the messages I'd sent to Moose, saying how I didn't find her remotely attractive and I was only with her for a free ride. "Trudes, my babes, come on, those messages were just me joking." I laughed. "I was just messing around." "Shut up, you liar! You find me hideous. Alex was right. You were only using me for my money, and worse, you never went to college. Instead, you were in jail." I was about to lay on the coal charm when Alex and Beatrice bursted into the room. Alex shouted at me, "How lowlife you are! What a shameless gold digger! It's appalling. I've told her to report you to the cops." Beatrice interrupted. "No, don't do that. What Cole did was wrong, but he's not all that bad. Please." I was so moved. Took a look around. Trudy was crying. Alex was so furious his eyes were bulging. And Beatrice, well, she just looked disappointed. I then packed my stuff and left in shame. Well, that was a few months ago, and I have a decent job now. Even though I live back at home, I pay my way, and I'm saving up to put a deposit down on my own place. I never should have used Trudy like that. She might be old, but she still has feelings, and the way I treated her wasn't right. I was undeniably a douchebag back then. All I want is to have a happy life with Beatrice. I really love her, which is why I asked her to be my girlfriend, but she rejected me. Man, it stung, but I'm not giving up. Perhaps she might give me a chance once she sees I've changed. I can't fix the past. All I can do now is improve myself and keep on rolling forward.
It was a normal Monday morning. I was standing by my locker when this Layla girl walked over, leaned against the locker next to mine, and talked to me in this sultry voice. "Hi, handsome. Do you have any plans after school?" I looked around in confusion. Was she talking to me? Usually girls like Layla didn't talk to guys like me. I mean, come on, look at her. She's the hottest girl in school. While I'm Felix, just your average-looking nerdy guy. I awkwardly replied, "Oh, hi, I'm just doing my homework after school. Bye." Then I left her there, dumbfounded. But it didn't end there. At the end of school, she approached me again and asked, "Do you want to hang out with me?" Followed by a wink. No thanks, I really have to finish my paper on the French Revolution." Then I walked off. Man, did she really want to hang out with me? No way. She must have lost a bet or something. Even on the next day, Layla, one more time, made a beeline for me with this scary, determined look on her face while I was chatting with my friends. And in a serious tone, she said, "Look, Felix, do you want to be my boyfriend?" What? All my friends started to cheer. I was so embarrassed that I shooed them away to get some privacy with Layla. I'm flattered, but no." She scowled at me. "Excuse me? Do you realize that I'm Layla Hall, the prettiest and most popular girl in this entire school? Not to mention a member of the cheerleading team?" Ugh, cheerleaders are so dramatic. I calmly replied, "Sorry, but you're just not my type." She shouted back, "What? I'm everybody's type!" I just shrugged and left. My God, that was awkward. But at least she got the hint now, right? Well, wrong. Because that's when the trouble just began. Firstly, it was this flood of junk emails and newsletters. then strange phone calls from the spa and nail salon, asking if I had made an appointment for the day, which I obviously didn't. On top of that, there's a fake Facebook account that started spreading unflattering pictures of me around, picking my nose in French class, pulling this weird tongue-out concentration face as I checked over my essay. There was even a slow-mo clip of me chewing like a camel as I enjoyed my burger. Man, I was an ugly eater. While I was scrolling through these pics, Layla jumped out at me with a big smirk on her face. Be my boyfriend, then the pranks'll stop. Right, of course it was her. Didn't she have better things to do? I shook my head and said, no thanks. This still beats being with an annoying girl like you. Then a few days later, as I walked into school, I noticed that everyone was giving me dirty looks. Was my shirt inside out or something? Nope. So what was the problem? I asked some of my friends and, geez, Layla told everyone that I kissed her, then ghosted her. She's a real-life Harley Quinn. Hot, but totally crazy. Only a lunatic like the Joker could love her. I'd had enough of her antics. I couldn't let her make me look like the bad guy for something I didn't do. So at lunch, I charged over to her table and yelled in her face, "Are you crazy? Why can't you understand that I don't like you?" Then I shouted so everyone could hear me, "Hey, listen, this rumor about me kissing and ghosting Layla is a total lie. She made it all up because I refused to date her. So please, save your dirty looks for someone else. Thank you." Layla shoved past me and ran out of there. Ugh, okay, maybe I was a little harsh. But you'd brought it on yourself, princess. Then during French class, she was absent, but no one knew where she went. Was it maybe because of me? Nah, probably not. But as I was walking home, I spotted her sitting alone on a swing in the playground. Just go, Felix. This girl only brings trouble, I thought to myself. But oh man, she looked so sad. So the next thing I knew, I was walking over and sat on the swing next to her. I asked, "Why weren't you in French class?" "Just leave me alone. Stop pretending you care." "Look." I took a deep breath, then continued. "I'm sorry for yelling at you in front of the whole school. That wasn't cool. But what you did to me wasn't cool either. Shall we call it even?" Layla stayed quiet for a bit, but then she nodded and smiled at me. Well, that wasn't so bad, right? So from then onward, everything was fine between us. She even smiled at me in the hallway. Whenever I saw Layla, this warm feeling came over me, and I couldn't stop grinning. Once, I even spent my entire lunch break trapezing around school just so I could catch a glimpse of her face. Oh boy, I think I've fallen for Layla. But why now? I tried to ignore these feelings, hoping they'd eventually go away. But then Valentine's Day came along, and Layla, being the popular girl she is, received enough roses to open a florist. Ugh, how annoying. I needed to do something. So after school, I went to her house with some chocolates and a teddy bear. As soon as she opened the door, I blurted out, "I know I'm a big dumb idiot. Rejecting you was a huge mistake. Please, will you be my Valentine?" I stood there red-faced and prepared for rejection. But she just snatched the gift out of my hands, then said, "Yeah, okay then." Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. Me, your regular nerdy guy, was dating the most popular girl in school. Love is really unpredictable. I was amazed at how open she was to my nerdy stuff. She even watched The Mandalorian with me and cooed whenever she saw Baby Yoda. But the one thing that didn't gel so well between us was, yep, you guessed it, studying. Layla didn't seem to care about her grades, and I didn't want her to fail, so I offered to be her tutor. But she was constantly yawning and staring out of the window whenever we started studying. "Felix, I have an idea. Why don't you do my homework for me? In the meantime, I can go to cheerleading practice as we have an important contest coming up, and it means the world to me, just like your math quizzes do to you." What? Was she serious? My God, I hated cheating like this. But she gave me that puppy-eyed look, and me being the sucker I am, I agreed. "Thanks, Felix, you're the best." She kissed me on the cheek, then immediately passed me a huge pile of homework. I asked her why she had so much, and she explained that because she didn't understand it, she let them pile up. But hold on, why did she have Spanish? She was in French class with me, not Spanish. But she just shrugged and said her parents forced her to study it outside of school. Oh, my poor little pumpkin. One day, like usual, I stopped by her place to pick up her homework, but she wasn't home. That was odd. Today wasn't cheerleading practice, so where could she be? I looked through the stack that she asked her mom to give me and saw some Spanish worksheets. So I said to her mom, "Oh, she must be in her Spanish lesson, right?" Her mom looked a bit confused, then laughed. "You know Layla, she's far too stubborn to agree to extra classes." Huh? So the papers weren't hers? Then whose it was? And why? Suddenly I felt this uncomfortable feeling itching under my skin. I decided to confront her later at school. Then the next day I was walking through the hallway looking for Layla when I suddenly heard some guys cheering, something about getting an A in Spanish. Wait a minute, did he say Spanish? I turned to see who it was, and to my shock it was Hector, the captain of the soccer team. Hector was popular for being all handsome and everything, but also for sucking at school. Someone must have done his homework for him, and you guessed it, yeah, this someone was me. It all made sense now. Layla and Hector must be a couple. They may have been hot stuff, but they both sucked at studying. So she was using me to do both of their homework. It all made much more sense now. None of this relationship was real. It was all just an act. And no way was I letting them get away with this. I had a perfect plan to expose them. During lunch, I sat down at the table closest to Hector. Then I went into lovey-dovey overload with Layla. I fed her cheese fries, then I stroked her hair and loudly told her how soft it was. I quickly glanced over at Hector for his reaction, but nothing. He seemed more interested in her burger than her. Layla raised an eyebrow at me. Are you okay? You're acting really weird. I laughed loudly, then placed my arms around her, then said, it was actually more like shouting, "Oh, because you're so cute!" But why was there still no reaction from Hector? He and his friends even cheered, and on his way out of the canteen, he gave me a thumbs up. Layla didn't look fazed at all either. Man, somebody call the academy, 'cause these two deserved an Oscar. My plan was a massive fail. This was so frustrating. I fell silent and Layla noticed and gave me this quizzing look. Something is definitely off. You're being really strange. Okay, if she wanted to know, then fine. So I blurted out. I know that the Spanish papers belong to Hector. You're together and you're just using me to do all your homework. I'm not stupid, you know. Nice meeting you, but please don't ever talk to me again. Then I left without saying a word. Well, that's the end of my story. A rather sad one, right? I would be lying if I said I wasn't feeling down about it. I truly do love her. Whatever. I'm going to college in a few months and I'll get to meet a cute, geeky girl who won't trick me into doing some other dude's homework. Sorry guys, someone's calling me. My God, it's Layla. What does she want? We're done. Stop calling. What? Fine. Promise you'll leave me alone after this? Okay, wait, I'm coming downstairs. Oh my God. Layla's at my front door and she insists to not leave unless I have a talk with her. Ugh. Don't move, everyone. I'll tell you every detail as soon as I'm back. Jesus, guys, you won't believe what Layla's just told me. The thing is that her cheerleading team had to practice a lot for upcoming contests, which means they couldn't study as much. Therefore, they had to find someone who was willing to do their homework so their grades wouldn't slip. That's when Layla came up with the plan to win me over as her boyfriend. The flirting, the pranks, they were all part of her plan. That was the truth. But Layla didn't know about the Spanish worksheets because her teammate Harper gave them to her. Turns out Hector is Harper's boyfriend. Didn't see that coming, right? But I was still super mad at Layla because she still used me. Then Layla took out some papers and showed them to me. It was homework with all B's on them. Then she told me, okay, I admit that at first I didn't like you. I only approached you to take advantage of you. But then I actually fell for you as I got to know you better, okay? So I stopped giving you my homework and did it on my own. So, her feelings for me were real too? I couldn't believe it. Eventually I forgave her and now we're happier than ever. I must say, when Layla first talked to me, I thought she was this crazy girl like Harley Quinn, who I could never like. But I was wrong. Turns out I'm the one who's crazy about her. So, I guess I have more in common with the Joker than I first thought.
Yeah, here's another load of bills to add to the pile. Oh, hey, I'm Zoe, a recent graduate turned office worker with a lousy wage. I could barely afford to pay for food and rent, let alone think about my college debt. It wouldn't matter so much if it was just me, as I could live off of noodle soup. But I also had Birdie to think about, my little sister. Oh, she's back from school. Zoe, I found Daddy today! Huh? I looked at her with a wry smile. Actually, this was nothing new. You see, our parents died when Birdie was just a toddler, so now she longed to have parents just like her friends did. She often said to me, Zoe, you're like my mommy, but Clara and Polly have daddies too, and I want one. She was so innocent that whenever she saw a friendly-looking man on the street, she'd ask me, is that my daddy? Come on, come here. How was school today? Daddy is very handsome, and he lives in a big house. Come on, I'll take you to him. Oh, my lord. This wasn't a house. It was a mansion. Confused, I was about to question Bertie on this, but she started ringing the bell repeatedly. Before I could stop her, someone who appeared to be the butler came out and happily let us inside without questioning anything. That's odd. I sipped on my iced tea and peered around at the grandness of the place, absorbing the rich energy, when suddenly, a very dashing guy walked over. There he is! That's Daddy! Huh? This was so confusing, and seeing her hug a stranger was super embarrassing. I had a talk with the guy to figure out what happened, and apparently he's called Harry, and he's 22 like me. Huh? That's crazy, as he looks and acts way older. As for the dad story, it turns out as Bertie was waiting for the school bus, she saw a woman drop her purse. So she rushed over and picked it up and was about to return it, but the woman turned around, saw Bertie holding it, and accused her of being a thief. Just in time, Harry appeared and claimed to be her father to settle the matter. Then he took her to the mansion and showed her around. So that's what happened. Ugh, my sister. Bertie has told me everything. She's such a precious child. I'd happily adopt her. No way! Why not? You like being here, don't you, Bertie?
Zoe, I really like it here. I can play with Oreo as much as I want. And now, I have a daddy just like Clara and Polly do.
But I can't just leave her alone. Of course not. You can stay with Bertie. What? How come such a good person suddenly fell from the sky? Skeptical, I told Harry I needed more time to think. He smiled and handed me his business card and told me to call him any time. What is this? Harry Atkins, the eldest son of the chairman of ATLAC Corp? Unbelievable! His name was all over the internet as a rich and educated young man. If that was the case, then surely this had to be legit, right? I can't afford to pay these. My sister and I deserve better than this life. Besides, it would be nice to have a place to stay for free, right? So the next day, I went to see Harry and offered to help with the housework as payment. Harry agreed and presented a prepared contract. Contract? Okay. But there was a clause in it that required me not to mention that I was Bertie's sister. This was a little odd, but never mind. It didn't matter. Here was to our new luxurious life. Wait, but does that mean I also have to call him Dad? So, yeah, my new life began. And oh boy, it was crazy. A maid brought me breakfast in bed and did all my laundry. So much for helping out with household chores. There are actually more servants in this house than the number of staff in my office. So it's obvious that there's nothing left for me to do. Even so, I wanted to be useful, because hearing them calling me Miss made me feel quite embarrassed. However, oops, turns out I suck at house chores. Once I put Harry's fine suit in the washing machine and ended up ruining it, which made him pace up and down the room in anger. Also, he couldn't seem to say anything nice about me, always complaining about the flowers I bought or saying the muffins I spent hours baking were too chewy. He threw away all of my handmade stuff because he thought it was garbage. What a rude man! Oh, wait, he's not even a man. He's just a stubborn kid who doesn't care about other people's feelings. I tell ya, if it weren't for Bertie and that contract, I'd... Phew! But those are just small gripes. In general, our life here was great. Bertie is very happy, and seeing her living her best life makes me smile. But unbeknown to me, turns out this was the calm before the hurricane. Hurricane Rachel! Harry's betrothed fiancée since childhood. She's from a rich family and is therefore deemed a suitable marriage alliance to Harry's family. I overheard the servants in the house saying that Harry is the successor to the company. So when he marries Rachel, the company will be even more flourishing. As soon as she saw me, Rachel kept asking Harry, "Hey, who is this? Why is she here? And this girl too? Why is there a kid in the house?
Who is this scary lady?"
Hearing that, Rachel looked at me from head to toe and then started firing questions at me. Why are you here? How do you know Harry? When are you leaving? Enough! What a relief. Harry intervened just in time, then dragged her into the reading room. Rachel followed Harry, but didn't forget to wrap her arms around his neck as she peered at me with a smug look on her face. Huh? What does she mean by that? Ugh, is she jealous? If that's the case, then she's wasting her time, because it is true that I have a crush on someone, but it's not Harry. You see, the other week I was wandering home from the grocery store when I met the love of my life. My shopping bag split, and my soda, cookies, and potato chips tumbled out. I was trying to pick everything up without getting run over, when suddenly a guy appeared and helped me. Then he drove me home. His name's Marcus, and he's so hot. After that, we exchanged numbers, and have been texting ever since. Marcus is so easy to talk to, so I confided in him about everything, from Birdie being adopted to the fact that I'm now working as a housekeeper. He's so sweet and kind, and I feel like I can tell him anything. He's the prince of my dreams. Anyway, my strange life in the mansion continued. One thing's for sure, Harry was great with Birdie. For her birthday, he surprised her with a trip to the amusement park. I have to admit, we had a lot of fun together. Birdie made us go on the carousel 5 times. Then we got ice cream. Suddenly, I noticed Harry giving me this odd look. What? You have some ice cream on your lips. Here. He leaned forward and gently dabbed it away with a napkin. Just then, a crowd rushed in, and Harry reached out and pulled me and Birdie closer to him. Our eyes met, and... Why did I have goosebumps and a pounding heart? What did that mean? Did he do that intentionally or not? Why did I have this strange feeling? While I was still sinking deep in my thoughts, Harry stopped the car and said he needed to pass by his brother's place for some files. Huh? Isn't that... Marcus? Marcus? I blurted out. You two know each other? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my attention to Birdie. When we got home, I kept wondering why Marcus never told me who he was. I texted him to ask, and he replied that they don't get along, so he didn't want me to know. Despite all that, I stayed up all night thinking about Marcus. And also Harry. It's safe to say I was confused about everything. Then, Marcus and Rachel suddenly showed up at Harry's house one day with a load of groceries. Rachel announced that she was baking a cake, as it's soon going to be her birthday, and we should all assist. Okay, weird, but whatever. I was preparing the mixture when Marcus took my stirring hand and insisted on helping me. Suddenly, Harry burst in between us. Upon seeing this, Rachel yanked on his arm and pulled him away. My eyes widened in horror as I saw the mixture fly into the air and slow-mo splatter all over us. We stood there covered in cake mixture as we all exchanged dirty looks. Okay, so after that little display, I think it's clear to say that Harry has feelings for me. Later on, when Marcus and Rachel had left, and I was freshly showered, Harry knocked on my door and, smiling at me, said, Zoe, there's a family dinner tomorrow where you'll get to meet my parents. Don't worry, you won't have to say anything. As a way of saying thanks, I'll pay off your college debts. Okay, so that was weird, but at this point, I'd learned not to question it anymore. Besides, it would be so nice to be debt-free, and it was just dinner, right? I want to break off the engagement with Rachel. This is my girlfriend, and we already have a kid together. What? I almost blurted out, but Harry squeezed my hand to stop me from saying anything, so I sat there with a dumbfounded look on my face. Right at that moment, Marcus and Rachel burst in. Stop the act! Mom, Dad, this isn't his girlfriend, and that little girl is actually her sister. She's just some poor maid. Yes, that's right. I've known all along. I'm the one who told Marcus to pretend to like you to get proof. What is all this? Mom, Dad, I don't think a liar like him should be the heir of your company. I hope you rethink your decision. I didn't understand. What's going on here? Girlfriend? My child who? The heir of what? I just knew one thing only, that I was fooled by both my crush and Harry. I felt like such an idiot. So I quickly grabbed Bertie, packed up all my stuff, then ran out of that mansion immediately. Poor innocent Bertie seemed so confused. She kept asking where her daddy was and why she couldn't stay with him. I took what was left of our savings to rent a small apartment for both of us. Life went back to normal. Final demand letters and all. This was our reality. I knew that now. The last 2 months were like a dream. It was time to wake up. But still, I felt a pang of sadness whenever I thought about how Harry had fooled me. I was snooping around online and saw an article about how Marcus had taken over the company, only to end up bankrupt due to his poor decision-making. As for Harry, well, he'd founded his own startup, and it seemed to be doing pretty well. But then, one sunny day, I was on my way to pick up Bertie from school when a familiar person walked alongside me.
Hey, it's a nice day, isn't it?
Harry? What do you want?
Look, I admit that at first, I was just using you to get out of my engagement with Rachel. But then, I want you and Bertie in my life. I love you, Zoe. Please come home with me.
When I got to art college, I had no idea the surprise I was in for, or the way it would flip my whole life upside down for many years to come. One day, I was walking in the hall when I noticed someone familiar. It was Andy, and I hadn't seen him since we were kids. I was so excited to see him that I immediately ran up to him to say hi. At first, I didn't think he recognized me because he just stared at me with this cold look in his eyes. I felt so disappointed. I'd had the biggest crush on him when we were younger, and seeing him standing there after all those years made me fall for him all over again. The thing about Andy is that he's super handsome, but he's got this cold, dark side to him, and he can be really quiet sometimes. It's probably because when he was just a kid, his dad wasn't around. His dad had an affair with his mom and then left before he was born, so he resented his dad a lot. When he was 10, him and his mom moved away, and I hadn't seen him since, until that moment in the hallway. That semester, we had a life drawing class, and Andy was there too. It felt like fate, and I decided that would be a good time to try and chat to him and maybe ask him out. My best friend Beth was in the class too, so she offered to help me. Usually, in life drawing classes, the models are old, wrinkly people, and they come in and pose naked for us, and it can be super awkward. Well, that's what the first few classes were like anyway, but then one day, a new model called Trey arrived. I was gobsmacked. This guy was an actual model. He had a six-pack and was seriously so handsome. I couldn't stop looking at him. He was like some kind of Greek god that had just fallen down from heaven. After that first class with Trey as our model, we girls literally prayed that he'd be our model every single time. It was the highlight of the week, and everyone flirted with him. We even bought him snacks and drinks because, let's be honest, these life drawing models don't get paid much, so he must have been pretty desperate to take a job like this. Even though I was into Andy, I still joined in with the flirting with Trey because it was fun, and I could see that it annoyed Andy, which secretly made me happy. I wanted him to be jealous. But then, one day, I noticed the way Beth looked at Trey, and I realized she actually liked him in the way that I liked Andy. So I stopped flirting with him and offered to play Cupid to help Beth get Trey. Beth was constantly buying gifts and writing letters to Trey, but she was too shy to give them to him, so I always did it for her. One day after class was over, I ran after Trey, but he was too fast. I had to run all the way to the parking lot, but I still couldn't catch up with him. Instead, I was able to see him climbing into a fancy sports car and driving off. I felt kind of sorry for him. Maybe he also worked as a driver for someone rich. But just after I had that thought, he drove past me, rolled down the window, and asked if I needed a ride. I was so stunned, I didn't even say anything. I just shook my head and stared. I was so shocked, I even forgot to give him Beth's letter. After he drove off, I just kept staring. There was no way he was someone's driver. He oozed confidence, and that's the moment I realized he must have been rich. I ran back inside to find Beth and told her that maybe Trey wasn't as poor as we thought he was. Then I described his car, and you should have seen Beth's face. That only made her even more determined to win him over. The next day, it was raining, and Beth hadn't come to class. She said she was sick, but begged me to give Trey the letter. After class, Trey grabbed his umbrella and left. It was absolutely pouring, and I had no umbrella. But I knew how much this meant to Beth, so I ran after him, calling his name. I was completely soaked, and just before I made it to him, I tripped and fell. It was so painful, so I shouted, "Ouch!" really loudly. Trey turned around and totally freaked out. He came running over to me, gave me his umbrella, and carried me into the nearest building. As Trey was helping me, Andy walked by. He stopped and looked at us both, then kept walking. What if he'd misunderstood what was going on? After that, Trey drove me home, and I gave him Beth's letter. The next time Trey came to model, he stayed behind after class and asked me if I needed a ride again. Then he asked me how my leg was doing. It was so awkward, because Beth was standing right next to me, and I started to think that maybe Trey was interested in me. Suddenly, Andy came up behind us and said to Trey,
Give it up already. Are you just here to laugh at me? It's not like you need this money, so just quit.
Then he stormed off all angry. Whoa, so Andy and Trey knew each other? After that weird incident, it became really obvious that Trey had feelings for me. In class, he'd always position himself in front of me, and he even winked at me when I was drawing him. The semester was almost over, so one day I said to Beth we should just tell our crushes how we feel. What if we never saw them again? It was now or never. So, on the day of our last life drawing class, we wished each other good luck. I went to the bathroom first to check my hair, and then I went to find Andy. But I couldn't see him anywhere. I was running around looking for him when I bumped into Beth. She couldn't find Trey either. And then we saw them. They were standing outside together, and it looked like they were having a serious argument. We walked closer to try and hear what was going on, but then Andy walked off. Trey grabbed Andy, and they started pushing each other, but then suddenly Trey grabbed Andy and hugged him tight. Beth and I looked at each other, and without even saying anything, we both knew what the other one was thinking. We'd been chasing two gay guys! This isn't the end, though. It's in fact only the beginning of my crazy love story. Stay tuned for the next part where I'll update you guys on what happened next.